School funding is an important topic that we have all heard a lot about in our teach classes. It is our responsibility to be aware of how it works and stay up to date on how it will affect our own classroom and our future students. In this presentation, we will break down exactly where the funding comes from, why some believe the system is unfair, and what types of cuts some schools are being forced to make. The amount of funding that a school district receives varies across states, but each one will receive yearly funding from several different resources. According to the Illinois report card, districts in our state receive a small portion of funding from the federal government and a slightly larger portion from the state government. The districts in Illinois will receive the largest portion of their funding from the town's property taxes. The schools should combine these three resources and provide adequate tools for their students to receive a proper education. Unfortunately, this isn't always the case. During the financial crisis of 2008, our nation experienced a steep decline in property tax revenue. With massive job losses leading to lower family incomes, school districts found themselves in a dire state of need. In an attempt to prevent major job losses for teachers, in 2009 the government created the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or the ARRA. This bill gave $100 billion to schools nationwide, and while it helped them survive for a while, many states quickly realized that it created only short-term solutions that led to long-term issues. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities report that at least 34 states were providing less in-state aid per student in the 2013 to 2014 school year than in the 2007 to 2008 school year. Attempting to come back from this deficit, the National Report Card is working to help states improve the fairness of their funding. The trend in recent years has been that students who are living in poverty attend schools that are in high poverty districts. These districts will receive less money from the property taxes provided by the community because the houses are normally placed at a lower value. Although they may be receiving similar amounts of funding from the government, when compared to a non-poverty school district, low-poverty school districts collect less revenue overall. This means they will usually spend less money per student and may be unable to provide access to the tools necessary for educational success. All of these factors can lead to districts being forced to take major cuts in the programs that they offer.
School funding, or lack thereof, greatly affects America's students today. Since the recession in 2008, schools have experienced a major cut in funding. In fact, according to OLIF, the cuts have deepened over the past few years. This leaves funding in schools well below allowances prior to the recession and leads to many further issues. Ostrander discovered that children from urban areas are more affected by school funding than those from other settings. In her article, she explains that students in urban areas have low property values, which contributes to the lack of funding in surrounding schools. This is unfortunately true in migrant areas as well because immigrant families often live in government-owned or low-valued homes, providing little funding to nearby schools. Because of this, schools are not able to provide resources such as technology, books, and supplies beneficial to supporting students' education. In addition, lack of school funding affects the quality of programs provided for students with special needs. According to OLIF, as funding decreases, aids and resources for these students become more sparse. School funding is important because, according to Leachman, students who attend better-funded schools have a higher chance of graduating high school and earning higher salaries in their career. He mentions that lack of school funding should not be the reason the child does not graduate. Every child deserves an equal chance to succeed. Skinner also expresses why school funding is so important through her interview with Richard Fleming, an administrator of a low-funded rural school. Fleming says his school is put into survival mode every time a cut is made because it affects the quality and diversity of his students' education. For example, when the school's first funding cut was made, they had to get rid of electives such as art and music. Fleming's school has not been renovated since the 1930s and lacks a sufficient amount of textbooks for the school's population, all due to funding cuts. Although school funding provides educational resources and opportunities, it also funds safety aspects within and around the school. For example, Craddock discusses that schools with adequate funding are able to build sidewalks and provide staff to assist students in walking or biking to school. This is intriguing because schools in areas in urban settings often need to be monitored most due to higher crime rates in these areas. However, Ostrander discovered these schools received the least funding.
The future of this issue is unclear, but with so much talk and minimal change, it can be easy to get discouraged. Educational funding reform has existed for over 4 decades. In an article published by the National Public Radio, it was stated that in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson enacted the federal education program called Title I. This program sends federal money to schools in low-income districts. Title I is a program that is still used today to help schools across the nation. However, programs like this are not enough to close the gap between high and low-income schools. One step in the right direction discussed in the same article is the completion of adequacy studies. These studies use schools performing at or above state averages on tests as the basis for what is needed at other schools. This, though, also causes a problem because, as stated previously in the video, schools in lower income areas receive less funding due to the lack of available funds by taxpayers and donors. This is also addressed in an article written by Matthew Chingos and Kristen Blagg, stating that schools in these lower income areas often receive $30,000 less per student than schools in wealthier districts. This gap, as pointed out in the article from the National Public Radio, is growing, with no current signs of shrinking. Another article written by Chingos and Blagg looks at the balance between state and local funding. The percentage of funding that comes from state and local governments varies from state to state. Illinois has the highest percentage of funding coming from local institutions. Illinois schools rely on local funding for over 70% of their budget. This creates an even bigger gap for schools in lower income areas. The same article states that school funding remains an active topic in state legislators and courts around the country, with policies being overturned and rewritten as recently as 2017. Any current, former, or future teachers like ourselves would agree that something has to change in terms of school funding and how it is distributed. This is something we as teacher candidates have been able to see firsthand in our clinical placements this semester. With schools such as Harvard Park Elementary and Blue Ridge Intermediate School being only a little over an hour from each other, it is shocking to see how different the two schools are. Harvard Park is a Title I school in a high poverty-ridden area and has almost twice as many students qualifying for free or reduced-price lunch than students at Blue Ridge. These trends carry over into their academics, with more than half the 5th graders at Harvard Park not yet performing at grade-level standards for more than one subject area. It is clear that change needs to occur that will cause the gap between students to shrink or close completely. The solution to school funding, although by no means a simple one, can be summed up in a quote from Corey Turner. The solution is dialogue, for all Americans to look more closely at the school across town or downstate and to consider the stories of the students inside. Because not every child is the same, but everyone deserves the access to a good education.